March is an interesting time for amateur astronomers. The autumn and winter constellations of Aries, Cassiopeia, Orion, and Taurus are slipping low into the western skies, and the first of the summer constellations of Berenices, Taurus and Virgo, start to appear late in the night to the east. This is the start of the season of galaxy spotting, and March gives us the one opportunity of the entire year to catch all of the Messier objects in the sky in one very long night of observing. I'm Chris Budnitsky from the Fort Worth Astronomical Society. We're going to talk about Charles Messier and the Messier Marathon. Charles Messier was a French astronomer who lived from 1730 to 1817. His interest in astronomy was piqued by the arrival of the Great Comet of 1744 and an annular solar eclipse visible from his hometown. He spent most of the rest of his life observing and recording the night sky, becoming a prolific comet hunter and finding 13 comets during his life. King Louis XV named him Ferret of Comets. During his observations, he would often come across the same objects over and over, soft, fuzzy, and diffuse, that could be misidentified as comets. His friend and assistant, Pierre Messier, put together a list of these such objects. This list includes 39 galaxies, 5 planetary nebulae, 7 other sorts of nebulae, and 55 star clusters. Over the years, they would update the list, and by the time of his death, there were 103 objects in his list, with the last 7 posthumously added when historians and astronomers found much later that he, or Messier, had, in fact, already found them. So Charles Messier, Pierre Messier, found 110 objects which were not comets, but were far larger and far more interesting, some of the brightest objects in the night sky. These are all easy targets for beginner astronomers with small telescopes. After all, Messier's own telescope was just a 4-inch refractor. In March of every year, there is an opportunity for amateur astronomers on a dark night near the new moon to try and find every single one of the objects on the Messier list. Starting at sunset and ending at sunrise, you have about 8 minutes to find each object, observe it for a little bit, and go on to the next one. Going over all of the Messier list would take a while, so let's do a highlight of the top 20 Messier objects in the night sky you can see with a small telescope. Remember that these images are usually made with multiple long exposures, techniques astronomers use to bring out faint details that would otherwise remain invisible in small telescopes to your eye. M31, the Andromeda Galaxy. It is amazing to see the Andromeda Galaxy through your telescope. In reality, we can never see it as well as these images illustrate. Yet here we can see the light of 1 trillion stars that took 2 million years to travel to us, for the photons to hit our retina or camera sensor. There are 2 other Messier objects near the Andromeda Galaxy, M32, which is a dwarf elliptical galaxy closer to the core, and M110, which is another dwarf elliptical galaxy, this time further out, but both are orbiting the larger galaxy. M15, globular cluster in Pegasus. This 12 billion-year-old cluster is home to over 100,000 stars and is about 35,000 light-years away from us. It is one of the densest globular clusters orbiting the Milky Way, packed with stars in the center. Through a small telescope, you will see the bright center of this cluster surrounded by a hazier outer region. A larger telescope will resolve individual stars in the outer edges. M2, globular cluster in Aquarius. Messier 2 is one of the largest globular clusters known, containing about 150,000 stars. Under ideal conditions and dark skies, this cluster is bright enough to see with the naked eye, but it is a challenge to locate being in a remote area of the sky. It is best to find M2 with a wide field eyepiece and then switch to a higher power for more magnification. M42 and M43, Orion Nebula in Orion. Shimmering around the stars in Orion's sword, hanging from Orion's belt, are both M42 and M43. This tiny patch of light is actually some 20 light-years across. The larger M42 is separated from M43 by bands of dust, but both are part of the same complex of star formation. A larger telescope will make it possible to distinguish the 2 nebulae as distinct, but even through a small telescope you will see the blurry nebulae and this faint, small, young cluster of stars at the core, called the trapezium. M79, globular cluster in Lepus. 41,000 light-years away from us, and 60,000 light-years from the center of the Milky Way, Messier 79 is believed to be outside of our galaxy. It is a much harder target to find than many other globulars, but it is rewarding both because of the challenge it gives and the compact ball of light it presents through your eyepiece or on your sensor. M45, Pleiades in Taurus. This open cluster, just 500 light-years away, is easily visible to the naked eye as a patch of light containing a V of stars, mostly hot young blue ones. A small telescope or binoculars will bring out the seven sisters and perhaps a few dozen more, while a larger telescope will show the 200 or so stars that will make up the cluster. Longer exposures will bring out the nebulosity of the reflection nebula around the cluster. This is not leftover gas from the cluster's formation, but a region of dust that the cluster just happens to be passing through on its orbit around the Milky Way. M44, the Beehive, open cluster in Cancer. On the edge of being visible to the naked eye in dark skies, M44, the Beehive, is a great target for small telescopes and low-power, wide-field eyepieces. Less than 500 light-years away from Earth, this 600-million-year-old open cluster contains upwards of 1,000 stars, but a small telescope may only resolve 50 or so. M67, open cluster in Cancer. This open cluster of over 500 stars in the constellation of Cancer is ancient, estimated between 3.2 and 5 billion years old. It is a nice find for an astronomy beginner because it's such a rewarding sight through the lens of a small telescope. M67 covers a relatively wide area of the sky, so low powers and wide-field eyepieces will help see all of it. Small telescopes will resolve a number of the brighter stars, but the fainter stars which aren't resolved add to the glow of the general region. M65 and M66, galaxies in Leo. A bonus here, as the two Messier galaxies, M65 and M66, along with NGC 3628, make up the Leo triplet. While larger telescopes and long exposures bring out interesting details in the three galaxies, a beginner with a small telescope can still see all three galaxies at the same time. There are actually several other galaxies in Leo on the Messier list, so you can hop from one to the next, seeing 5 in just a few minutes, along with several other NGC galaxies Messier did not find. M13, the Great Globular Cluster in Hercules. For those of us in the Northern Hemisphere, summer brings the Milky Way into its best position for viewing, which means that clusters are front and center. M13, as its name suggests, is a giant globular cluster of some 300,000 stars in the heart of Hercules constellation, spanning 145 light-years and just 22,000 light-years away from us. Even a small telescope will show you an impressive ball of light, but a larger telescope will begin to resolve stars near the core. This is definitely the best globular to observe from northern latitudes. M92, globular cluster in Hercules. Messier 92 is a very bright and nearby neighbor of Messier 13, though not quite as spectacular. Even at 26,000 light-years away, great seeing in dark skies can make this object visible to the naked eye, but a small telescope brings it to life for amateur astronomers. For this cluster, observing it for a longer period of time will let it become more distinct in the eyepiece. With a small telescope, you will resolve a few individual stars of the several 100,000 it is believed to contain, but it is a spectacular sight to see. This cluster also seems to have some of the oldest stars that we know of, almost matching the age of the universe at 13 billion years. M57, the Ring Nebula in Lyra. The Ring is a beautiful planetary nebula. We call these planetary nebulae because they appear mostly round, like dim little planets that do not move in the sky. In reality, it is the glowing remains of the outer layers of a star, from a red giant at the end of its life, exploding and leaving a white dwarf behind, the slowly cooling core throwing off harsh ultraviolet light and making those remnant gases fluoresce. Using a medium-powered eyepiece and a small scope will easily bring the small disk of light into view, looking much more blurred than the stars in the same view. A larger telescope will allow more definition of a ring of light around a dark center, perhaps even be able to see the light of the white dwarf. The very largest of amateur telescopes, 30-inch and larger Dobsonians, might, perhaps in dark skies and in great seeing, be able to see a little color in the ring. M8, the Lagoon Nebula in Sagittarius. The lagoon is near the heart of the Milky Way, a nebula and cluster that is barely visible to the naked eye from dark skies. Quite large, it spans 2.5 degrees by 40 arc minutes. For reference, the full moon only spans 30 arc minutes, or half a degree. This large cloud of mostly hydrogen gas is a faint haze through a small telescope, though the stars in the cluster are relatively easy to see. Longer exposures bring out the reds and pinks of the fluorescing gas, lit by the light of the young stars. M20, the Trifid Nebula in Sagittarius. Nearby to the lagoon and slightly smaller in apparent size than the full moon, the Trifid Nebula appears to be part of the same gas complex. Composed of two brighter portions, a red emission nebula and a blue reflection nebula, the Trifid's easily visible dark dust bands give rise to the name, meaning three-lobed. M27, the Dumbbell Nebula. The Dumbbell is another planetary nebula in Messier's list. At very low powers, it appears as a dim oval, but at medium-low powers, when the background of the sky is suitably dark, one can see it as a two-lobed or dumbbell shape with a faint oval background. M81, Bode's Galaxy, and M82, Cigar Galaxy, in Ursa Major. In a dark sky, these two galaxies are easily visible together with binoculars and a small telescope, though they become fairly tough in suburban skies. In a small telescope, they appear as two blobs of light. With dark skies and an 8-inch telescope, you will be able to see subtle spiral structure in M81. M82 is an edge-on galaxy and looks a bit like a cigar. It's also a starburst galaxy with lots of active star formation, so there's a subtle sparkle within it which is just visible with a larger telescope. These galaxies are in fact close in actual space as well as in the sky, separated by only 150,000 light-years. And like the Andromeda Galaxy and our own Milky Way, the two are on a collision course. M1, the Crab Nebula in Taurus. The first object on Messier's list, the Crab Nebula is a supernova remnant, corresponding to the bright supernova in 1054 CE recorded by Chinese astronomers. The pulsar at the center emits radiation from gamma rays to radio waves, lighting the gases still traveling away from the explosion. Barely seen through binoculars in dark skies, the structure can be seen with larger telescopes, and over a period of years, changes in the structure have been recorded in images taken by amateur astronomers. These are just a few of the objects on Charles Messier's list. In later videos, we will try to showcase more such objects in the night sky. Remember, there's a whole universe out there waiting to be explored. May your nights be clear and your views be breathtaking. Until next time.